It is really.
So
It is.
I wasn't gonna ask you this because I know you've mentioned it before, in different interviews or whatever. But people have asked you, so Christopher Ward, who is Christopher Ward, and what's the meaning of it? But I know, I think it's a fictionary
No,
name,
no, no,
if you
no. There were
will.
three. No, no, not at all. There were three of us: me, Peter, and Chris Ward. Chris Ward. Chris had been a friend of mine for
Ah,
20 odd years, and we founded the company. I came up with the idea for the company on his boat about
ah,
4 weeks
Mm.
after Peter and I had sold Early Learning Centre. So, and then we were looking for a name for the the brand, and we came up with MPC, Mike, Pete,
oh, okay.
Chris, but that was a
Mm.
bit like IWC.
Right.
We came up with Peter and my wife's maiden names, Fennel and Worswick, but that sounded a bit
Mm,
Dickensian, sort of
yeah.
bit 1780. Um, but we wanted it to be something real. So I suggest, and therefore one of our names, well, Mike France for an English watch brand isn't particularly a great name for an English watch brand, and it doesn't scan that well. Peter Ellis is a bit dull, but Christopher Ward has a really great
Yeah.
scan.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
has a great scan, and it's a very English name. So we said, right, we're going to call it after you, Chris. And Chris has been was along for the ride until a couple of years ago when he left. And so there was the three of us until 2019, and now there's two of us left. Yeah.
Okay.
Clearly, I
Cool.
did not do my research, and I apologize.
That's, that's
I
okay.
don't know where I heard, and I was like, "Oh, Christopher Ward," and for whatever reason, I just thought it wasn't like a real person. But apparently, I was completely wrong, and I admit
Mm.
that. But yeah, I think it has a great sounding name. First time I heard of Christopher Ward, I was like, "Oh, it sounds like a nice brand." What
Oh
is that?
yeah. Uh-huh.
So has a nice tone to it, like you said,
Right.
so that's cool. And I know another thing we weren't going to talk about, but I think we need to address because we've personally have criticized, if you will, is like the logo and the logo placement and how you guys kept
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
changing
Right.
things around. But I think now it's fair to say that you guys kind of settled on a logo, right?
yeah. I mean, people talk about it being disruptive. It certainly creates conversation, which is not a
Yeah.
bad thing. Um, we've always used there are three elements to the logo. There is the left aligned, where we use that probably in the majority of watches where we
Mm.
think the balance looks better. But we've always had a 12 o'clock version, which we've used on a number of watches where we think that also works best. And we also, with our motorsport collection that we introduced, we went what I call swoosh only. So the twin flags logo that we have, which represent England and Switzerland, because we obviously have, although we're a British brand, an English brand, we have our atelier
Yeah.
in Deal in Switzerland. So to represent those two countries, we created the twin flag logo, which always sits primarily on the crown of our watches, but also is embossed often at 12 o'clock
Okay.
as well. One day, when it's right, I think Chris Ford may well have its own Nike swoosh only moment, because I'd love us to, at the right time, just go with the twin flag logo.
That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
Okay.
It's clean, right? But you need to get to that stage where you're recognizable, and obviously all of us watch guys will definitely recognize it. But I think you're getting there. I mean, since
Yeah,
Oh
it's a
2005,
yeah.
timing
you've been
issue.
around.
Yeah, yeah, it's a
Oh
timing
yeah.
issue. So maybe soon. Who knows? Who knows?
You heard it here first,
Oh
right,
yeah.
P. Ross?
That's right. So how involved are you in the watch design when it
Hmm,
comes to actually
that's a
designing the
great
watch?
question.
Um, very involved. We're very lucky to have some fantastic watch designers. Um, One of the greatest young Swiss watch designers works for us, a guy called Adrian Buckman, who came over to the UK 6 years ago to work with us, and we also have Will Bratfield, who works with Adrian on design, and we also have the engineering teams primarily in Switzerland. In terms of the creation of a watch, the idea for a watch can come from almost anywhere and anybody. It can sometimes be a almost scientific analysis of the market and the gaps in the market and where we aren't and where we could be, and then we work up the designs that fit that gap in the market. Or sometimes it can be as simple as somebody wakes up in the morning with a great idea and wants to share it, and we all think it's a great idea, and we go off and make a watch. But the new product development, I lead the new product development team, and it's a constant. We're constantly working on any number of watch designs at any moment in time. At the moment, we're looking to 2022, 3, and even 24 at the moment. Wow. In terms of where we're looking. I'm heavily involved, and I have the privilege, sometimes it seems like a privilege, of I sign off all of the designs. So at the end of the day,
that's cool.
It's down to me if it goes in the collection or not. So it's my fault.
It's your fault. It's Mike's fault.
That's cool. That's cool.
No, that's cool. That's cool. So one of the big questions that we've asked is to other brand owners, and they have their own version of what they think the answer is, right? So the question that we've asked is, what makes up a micro brand and what makes up an independent brand? So to me and personally, it definitely is scale, right? Because depending on how many watches you're selling, reputation, maybe that's another one. But that's pretty much all I got. I don't know. We've discussed, P. Ross and I have had many smaller brands on the podcast, and we always feel kind of weird. Are they an independent? Are they micro brand? So obviously you've been around since 2005. So we don't consider you obviously a micro brand because of your scale. But why don't you tell us what do you consider a micro brand and independent? And furthermore, if you're comfortable, how do you categorize Christopher Ward?
I agree with you, Miguel. I mean, to a large extent, I think scale determines whether a brand is micro or not, and the name itself suggests scale. But it also, I think, I think we don't describe ourselves as a micro brand. We're just a watch brand now. I mean, at the moment, I think we're probably in volume terms. There are about 400 plus Swiss watch brands. In volume terms, on the mechanical watch front, we probably rank somewhere around 35 at the moment. So we're
respectable.
We're
very
not
respectable.
We're not Rolex, but we're doing okay. And people do talk of us, I think, as the granddaddy of micro brands, because I suppose to some extent we pioneered that approach. But I do think I would hate us to lose the sort of hunger of micro brands. I think Jeff Bezos of Amazon says, the day he wakes up every day and thinks of them as a startup.
Wow.
And I think if you are always thinking about yourself as a startup, you keep kind of an energy level and a focus and hunger. And I think one of the great things about the watch industry at the moment is with the plethora of micro brands that have entered, there's this kind of energy, an infusion of energy into the industry. And I think energy and an attitude is important. And so I'd like to think that we still have some of that, even if we're in scale terms no longer considered a micro brand. So I hope we think like a micro brand, and keep that freshness about us.
That's a great answer.
Cool.
And any other micro brand or smaller brands listening to this, I mean, this is inspirational, and you know, I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, you got to keep that hunger, and you got to keep just your head down, just keep grinding it out, and be passionate about it. You know, and it truly reflects. I mean, yeah, I mean, every time I look at your watches or new releases, I could see the passion that goes into it. It's not like you're resting on your laurels or Rolex, but you know, yeah. Oh man, yeah, we could. That's a whole other. That's a whole other discussion.
The shade,
man. I'm telling you,
yeah.
it's so. Sorry to deviate. It's just disappointing, you know, as a watch lover and watch collector, that these guys could do the most minute, you know, change on their watches, and people go nuts, and they're sold out, and they're being sold on the secondary market for crazy prices. I don't get it. I just really don't get it.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? It's yeah, I guess you guys were a bit disappointed with the Explorer 2, the recent.
Oh my god, are you kidding me? It's like 50th anniversary. You would expect something, and what do they give us? Oh man.
It hasn't stopped an awful lot of people writing very long articles about it, though.
Yeah, and they keep getting, that's the whole thing. It's like they keep getting the momentum, and they keep writing this hype, and it's just it's crazy. And in my opinion, and I've said it before, and you probably never heard me say it, but I prefer Omega. If I'm being honest, I prefer Omega over Rolex. If I'm being honest,
why do you prefer Omega? Just out of interest.
So yeah, absolutely. So number one, heritage. I mean, they've been around longer than Rolex has, and not only that, they actually do make an effort to put new things out and be innovative, and they speak to the collectors. Rolex can care less. Like, they just don't. You know, they just do whatever's best for them. And Omega, I feel, caters more towards you know, their core audience, or not their core audience, but their fans, you know what I mean? And they're attainable, and they're, I don't want to say affordable, but you could get one if you want one, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and, no, I do know what you mean. Yeah. And I think to Omega's credit, the fact that they took on board George Daniels's coaxial escapement, and now the coaxial escapement is in you know, the majority of their watches, certainly most of their new launches for the last X number of years. When the Swiss watch industry, George actually took that to Patek Philippe first, and they wouldn't run with it because it was outside of their frame of reference. But there's no question that the coaxial escapement is, in my view, and not just my view, in the view of many people, great watch experts, including a friend of mine, Roger Smith, who took over from George and has now developed the coaxial to a whole new level of expertise. But the coaxial escapement inside a movement makes that movement superior to any other watch with a lever escapement in it. And the reason for that is no more complicated than for watchers and for watchmakers, for all of us. The enemy of watchmaking is lubrication. Yeah, when you have to put lubricants into any mechanical piece, whether it's a watch or a car or anything, what that's to do with is friction. Yeah,
right.
And of course, friction, and then the need to lubricate those areas of friction reduces over time the efficiency of the engine or the piece of mechanical engineering. And the beauty about the coaxial escapement is that it massively reduces the friction.
Right.
It's now no longer under patent. Yeah. But incredibly, the Swiss watch industry have not adopted it. So I'm a great fan of Omega, if not for no other reason than they were the ones who had the insight and the balls, frankly, to go and take that George Daniels escapement and make it mainstream and they moved watchmaking on enormously as a result of that.
I think also why like Omega really think they're better than Rolex. They've had better moments in history as far as the moon watch. I mean, think about the Bond movies, right? I know Rolex they had little sprinkles in there, but not like Omega, you know what I mean? And not only that, I think as far as vintage watches go, Omega has the best vintage collection, along with Timex vintage pieces ever. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I mean, I think you're being slightly harsh on Rolex. I mean, you know, Edmund Hillary did wear the Rolex to the top of Mount Everest, and
right.
They've had a few moments. You're right.
But Omega, I think, is, you know,
they're good. They're both great brands. As I say, for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think we're just all hating on Rolex just because they've become so unattainable. To be honest with you, that to the regular watch collector like ourselves, it's just like we don't have that kind of money to be.
It's all marketing bullshit. I mean, it's just that it's a very clever marketing scenario to keep prices elevated. It's that old trick of opening a nightclub and having nobody inside, but having a queue outside, isn't it? You know, everybody wants to get in, even though there's no one inside. I don't agree with it at all. But I having said that, one of the things that I would say about Rolex is their investment in the sort of machinery that's required to make excellent watches is beyond anything anybody else in the industry has ever done. I don't know if you guys have ever had the chance of visiting Rolex or even being outside of the Rolex factories in Biel or Geneva, but it is astonishing how much they've invested, and there's no question that in terms of because hardly a hand touches a Rolex watch. These are completely machine-made watches, you know. Outside of that sort of handmade, a lot of people think Rolex must be, you know, because they're Swiss, they must be handmade, and the human hand never touches a Rolex. It's all automated. They've invested so much, but because of that, a bit like one of the benefits of automation is that the tolerances can be finer,
right?
Yeah? And tolerances to the level of exactitude that Rolex employ means that their watches and their movements are incredibly precise, more precise than virtually any other watch, even at multiple times the cost of a Rolex. So if you're looking for high quality, high performance, Rolex is your man. Yeah, that's your brand. Yeah,
absolutely.
But yeah, the marketing of them and the bullshit that goes along with it, not for me. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. But segueing into, we're talking about movements. Back in 2014, you guys did something remarkable, right? So I'm gonna butcher the name, so I'll let you say it. But we all know that developing your in-house movement is very expensive and close to impossible. All these smaller brands even dream of one day maybe being in that position. But you partnered up with somebody called
Johannes Janker. Well, Johannes worked for us. He was working with us. He created a number of JJ calibers for us, which were modules on top of proprietary movements. The jumping hour, for instance, the moon phase. But a while back, we'd sort of known that at the time there was a lot of concern that ETA, for instance, the Swatch Group, was going to limit the supply of movements to the industry. That never happened, as it turned out, but for all sorts of different reasons. But nevertheless, if you go back to 2009, 2010, it was expected that there was going to be a sea change. And what that led us to was the view that, well, we didn't want to be beholden to anybody. So why don't we think about creating our own movement? And we were fortunate to have working with us Johannes Janker, who is the closest to a genius that I'll ever work with. Yeah, probably. Cool. Eastern European watchmaker. Worked for companies like Lang & Son before he came to us. He joined a company called Synergie Horloger, which was owned by a guy called Jörg Bader, and then we worked very closely with Synergie and Jörg and Johannes, and we funded and developed with them the Caliber SH21. And then the businesses were so close, we decided to merge. Yeah, so we merged with SH, and then we launched Caliber SH21 to the world. Yes, it was a really incredible journey, led by Johannes, but involving a lot of very clever people. Some really great partners helping us create the componentry. We were using at the time really innovative ways to create components, utilizing medical suppliers who were very adept at producing high caliber steel componentry, but had never been used for watches before.
Wow.
And so we, in just over 4 years, and at a fraction of the normal cost, we were able to deliver Caliber SH21 on July the 2nd, 2014. One of the things that marks out a good movement, you can only tell if you've got a good movement probably after about 5 years. It takes about 5 years of a cycle so that you know how reliable it is, how robust it is, what sort of problems people have with them, how easy to repair are they, etc., etc. And hand on heart, I'm very proud to say that our own movement of the movements that we use, ETA, Solita, famous movements, Caliber SH21 outranks them in terms of its robustness and its reliability.
Nice.
Cool.
And that's down to the guys, particularly the original design of Johannes, but also then the work that people like our technical director, Frank Stelzer, have done to keep refining and finding a problem and fixing it and improving it. And every year the movement has been improved. And we now have a sensational movement. And it's going to be celebrated in the autumn with a new watch that will have the Caliber SH21 in it, which will open up, we hope, the movement in a whole new way, so people can see the glory that is Caliber SH21 more than they've ever seen before. So we're very excited.
Wait. Right on.
Can't wait.
To be honest, I think the industry is really lazy about cases. If I see another slab-sided case, I'm going to shoot myself. It's just really dumb. And what we wanted was a beautiful piece of architecture that had a purpose. And Adrian created this light catcher design, which is sharpest in the C60 because that's the most dynamic tool watch end of the spectrum. As I say, the C65 is the retro dive collection and therefore has slightly softer line, probably a bit more like the DB9 in actual fact. The C63 Sealander, which we're launching the collection on, it sits somewhere in the middle.